Welcome to Conversations with Thought Leaders. My name is Andrea Sampson, and I'm the CEO and founder of Talk Boutique and the Thought Leader Academy. And today I am so excited to introduce you to my friend and thought leader, Rebecca Darwent, an internationally recognized expert in philanthropy, partnering with high capacity donors committed to community led initiatives. Her viral 2023 TED Talk, How to Fund Real Change in Your Community, showcases the power of collaborative giving. Rebecca is a 2024 World Economic Forum Young Global Leader, a Canadian Millennium Laureate, and in 2020, she co-founded the Foundation for Black Communities, spearheading fundraising, community engagement, and advocacy that resulted in a historic $200 million capital transfer to Black communities by the Canadian government and an additional $25 million from philanthropic partners. Her philanthropic advisory firm currently partners with the Gates Foundation, Philanthropy Together, and Rebecca sits on the boards of the Foundation for Black Communities and Forward Global Canada. Rebecca, welcome. I'm so excited to talk to you today.
It is a pleasure to be with you as well, Andrea. Thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome. And today we're talking about using collective, collective reconstruction to rebuild trust. And collective reconstruction is one of those terms that some people know, and I think a lot of people don't. So I thought maybe, with the work you're doing, Rebecca, you're going deep into this area. So help us to understand from your perspective, what is collective reconstruction?
So collective reconstruction is a concept that really refers to groups of people coming together to restore something. It could be to restore a physical place. It could be to restore an ecosystem from an environmental standpoint. It could be to rebuild trust. And where I see us in the world today, there are so many different crises happening at the same time. And we are seeing a pullback and an erosion of just trust in our neighbor, trust in ourselves, trust in our governments. And so I'd really like to talk a little bit today about how we can work together to rebuild trust.
Yeah, trust is one of those things. I mean, I think when we look at our world today, there have been so many things eroding our trust, whether it be, the rhetoric that comes through governments, or whether it be through the, conflicts throughout the world, or whether it be just through not understanding each other at a community level. I think trust has been one of those things that has, really been impacted over the last 5 years in particular. I mean, I think it's been happening for some time, and rebuilding trust is not something that just happens. And our world doesn't change quickly. So we're in an environment that continues to erode trust. So how do we rebuild it, given the fact of all the things that I just described?
The first component that I would encourage everyone to really think about is the fact that the dominant narrative that's out there is that it's one superhero that's going to put on their cape and save us, or it's one company that has all of the solutions or all of the answers. One country even can kind of have a geopolitical play that will save the day. And the thing that we know that nature teaches us, and that we know from time after time after time after time, is that it really requires a collective working together to shift and to make changes in a positive direction. So I'd encourage us all to take the first step of acknowledging that we don't have to be the one person to save the day. We don't have to put the cape on and have an answer. And instead, it's really about leaning into one another, leaning into diversity of thought and people and experience to fill in some of the gaps that we may not have ourselves. And so trust is the space of reaching out to someone else to have a conversation, to have some connection, and to reject kind of the individualism that is in our ears every single day.
And so, I hear that, and I agree. I think trust is built in groups. Trust is built through, one interaction at a time. But when we are looking at doing that. Like I mean, I think it's, I think we can all agree it's easier said than done.
Mm.
And, like when we're in groups, especially groups that have divergent thinking, they're coming in with people who from different backgrounds and different walks of life. And I know you, with your work that you're doing with the World Economic Forum, you've got a global platform. You're working with people from all over the world, and so as you take on this mantle of building a community that is reconstructing trust, how do you do that when you've got different perspectives who have very divergent points of view?
Mhm. So thing that I am constantly called to for myself is to listen and to listen humbly. So we're often told to listen to other people, but I think the component that is missing is being humble about it. So not coming to the table with any assumptions about what the other person is thinking or feeling or their perspective. And it requires humbling of ourselves to say, like, we don't have all of the answers, and really listening without needing to have the response in our back pocket. And I feel like a lot of the discourse that happens on social media, it's very one directional. We're often putting messages out, whether it's on our thought leadership or on social media, or even in conversations with our family members. It's out, 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 out. And I am encouraging us to take a moment to really listen without having the responsibility of a response, and to do it in a humble way, to allow the other person to fully express themselves and to fully express the nuance. There is a lot of black and white rhetoric out there right now. And I'm encouraging us to step into the gray, to step into kind of the messy middle of it all, and not to assume that there's a result, or assume that there is an answer, or assume that there's a solution. Let's just sit in this time in that messy middle and see what comes.
I think what you've just said is so important. I think it's the thing that as humans, it is the hardest thing for us to do, is to not look for a solution.
Mhm.
By nature, we're problem solvers. And there's nothing wrong with being a problem solver, and problems do need to be solved. But I think what I'm hearing you say is that, when we show up, not from a place of seeking a solution, but from a place of simply sitting to understand, listening to understand. I'm reminded of, the great books, Dr. Stephen Covey's, the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. One of his habits was seek first to understand and then to be understood. And I think that's much of what you're saying, is it's sitting in that place of discomfort, not having an answer, not having an opinion even, but listening from a place of curiosity. And then once you've listened, to check in and to really ensure that you've heard what they've said in the way that they want it. I know one of the things for me that when I remember reading that book in the 90s, as I'm aging myself, but what it did is it forced me to start to repeat what I thought I had heard.
Mhm.
And it was such a powerful way to validate not just what that person had said, but also the way in which I was listening.
Right. That's
And so, in this world of hyperactivity, where we are moving faster than ever, where it seems like there are more problems than solutions, how do we stay in that messy middle longer?
pausing and kind of taking that intentional deep breath, and not moving towards a transactional nature. There's some kind of heart focused and heart centered work that I think that we're all being called to in this moment. You asked me kind of about some of the global platforms that I'm part of. And one of the things that I am most heartened by is the fact that we can come together just as people. And yes, there are maybe some transactional benefits to it, but the transformational element is far beyond the transaction, but that takes time, and it's okay. Relationships are built, we have kind of many different adages around it, that relationships are built at the speed of trust, and
Mm.
trust, as you said, doesn't necessarily happen quickly. So why don't we just sit back and pause and wait and not rush? And that takes a bit of a discipline and an intentionality to really understand the whole of a person, not just their title or
Yeah.
the company that they work for or the thing that they may be able to give you. And realizing that there's a more holistic way of looking at people and looking at the work that can be done together.
You know, what I heard in that, and I think it's such an important thing to pull out, is that the way in which we have worked for probably the last 50 years has been in many ways very transactional, because it
Mhm.
has been about keeping feelings out, focusing on the facts and data, and building to a solution. And it's not that there's anything wrong with that. But when we are in a world that is moving as quickly as we are, the need for the human connection has never been greater. And bringing in these tools that have maybe been seen as being unnecessary in a transactional based world are absolutely necessary in a world that is devoid of trust, a
Mhm.
world where trust has been compromised again and again and again. And
Mhm.
so, you said pause, breathe. Um, and our breath is, of course, our most powerful medium for anything. It allows us it brings us life.
Yeah.
And when we take that pause and we breathe, it allows our thoughts to slow down and to find the place from
Mhm.
which we can listen with true connection. So, if we go back to this concept of collaborative reconstruction, in the concept of rebuilding a society, because I think that's what we're doing, and slowing down, how do we help others who are still living from a place of solution-based conversations?
Mhm.
How do we help them to learn?
I think it's an element of sharing examples where you move slower to go together. And there's a couple of things that I've seen. One, in the creation of the Foundation for Black Communities. I also see it in the work that I'm doing now with raising the awareness of collaborative funds and showcasing how they work. It's really taking the point of an individual and helping them to understand all of the different leverage points that are in their toolkit. So oftentimes I work in philanthropy. Oftentimes people think about money and resources, like the dollar that you can give. But there's many, many other ways that you can give and be generous. One is with your time and volunteering, your endorsement, your recommendation of someone, your willingness to open a door that may not be open for them. And so there are times when we'll need individuals to step up into their ability to give in all of these ways that I've just shared. And sometimes we'll need you to step back. And that requires listening to others and really kind of seeding that leadership to having a co-leadership and a coexistence together. And really, in the messiness, that's how we can kind of say, well, this is what I'm thinking. Does it work for you? Like, does it resonate with you? Can we take all of our different vantage points and lenses and create the whole? And then when you see kind of the whole from everybody's perspectives, then you know what levers to pull at what time, because you're not making the decision unilaterally.
Mhm.
And that's the component that I'm really excited about. What we have as an opportunity is to not make unilateral decisions, to really lean into our communities, whether it is our family community, whether it's our neighborhood, whether it is our organizations and our companies. Like there's so many different types of communities that we're all part of. And so the invitation is to ask those questions, to be present with others, and to see, is your vantage point true when you bring in other perspectives, and what lever point is the most meaningful to pull at this moment in time?
Thank you. That was a really great explanation of how to actually be an effective part of a community, of really stepping into it. And as I reflect on that and reflect even on the word community, because if I go back 20 years, we didn't talk about communities. Like maybe we talked about our family community or the communities within which we lived, but certainly from a business perspective, we certainly didn't talk about communities. And today we talk a lot about community. And I think it's a word that gets thrown around pretty easily, but without a lot of real understanding of what it truly means. And so, from your perspective, with the communities that you have created, communities that you are part of, and the communities that you're in the process of building, tell me what is community today, and how does it differ from what it was 20, 30, even 100 years ago? And how do we use community in our day-to-day work so that we show up maybe from that heart-centered place?
So it's interesting because I see myself even in this as you're talking about like the different ways that community manifests. I grew up in a rural part of Alberta, and my community was 10,000 people, the people that were around me at that time. And I didn't fully understand or appreciate that I was part of a global community as a young girl. And now when I see myself fast forward a few decades, I am part of a global community, and I have made friends around the world, people that if I'm in a moment of crisis or I need to think about something differently, I can call a friend in Kigali, Rwanda. I could call somebody in Mauritius. I could call somebody in Singapore, and have somebody who has a completely different vantage point on the thing that I might be facing, and I can lean into their wisdom by applying their lens to my context. And so I think a community is wherever you see connection. And we often overemphasize the direct ties that we have and underappreciate maybe the loose ties and connections. So I consider every person. I just came back from a conference in San Jose with colleagues it was called the Advisors in Philanthropy. And so this is everybody from tax attorneys to real estate agents to philanthropic advisors like myself. And that everybody who attended that conference is a community. They're all part of the ecosystem of that conference. And I see that as a community that I am a member of. I was a speaker at the conference, but I also am a peer in that space. And so I encourage us to think about community from a stance of who are you in connection with? And also, I think the piece that I like to tickle people is, who are you not in connection with? Who are people outside of those rooms, outside of your workplaces? Where are there relationships that you maybe have a community that you don't understand or have historically been disconnected from? Within a Canadian context, how are you reaching out to Indigenous communities and Black communities to understand what's going on in their day-to-day lives that may look different from your own? So when we think about community, it's who are you actually connected to? As well as people that and communities that you may be artificially distinct from or not connected to, and ask like, why is that?
Yeah, and so just as you started answering that question, you were talking about these, the people you can call in the different parts of the world. And I think that's something that we forget wherever we live in the world, we're in an ecosystem, a microcosm of inputs. And even though we are, constantly in these arenas globally online, so we're often looking at things and we think we've got a perspective that is more global in nature. In reality, we don't, because we're not in those communities. So the ability to pick up the phone and call, or send an email or a text to the person that you met at a conference, and they may not be your best friend.
Right.
That's okay. They don't need to be your best friend. They just need to answer that text or provide you with that one piece of information that you need. And by doing that, you're actually creating a connection with them. You're inviting them into a bigger conversation. You're building your own community. And that's powerful. And I think these are the things that have never been available to us in history. Right? I mean, we just didn't have the reach that we have today and the ability to have that input. So as we build our businesses, as we build our thought leadership, as we build our thinking, having those inputs is so incredibly valuable. So when you look at the work you're doing as a philanthropist, who is building community, because that is such a big part of what you do. What do you see changing? Because I think philanthropy is one of those things, again, much like collaborative reconstruction, is misunderstood. People will say, oh, that's an old term. Well, it's needed more now than ever. So tell us a little bit more about your work as a philanthropist, and how do you help the people you work with build communities of care and communities that actually are supportive of the right things?
Well, I think one of the things to start out with is that communal care and taking care of one another is ancient. It has been with us for all of our existence in humanity, and so it is almost a remembering of practices that have been in place for a long time. Mutual care, mutual aid, seeing somebody who needs something and calling, and being responsive to that call, is something that happens around the world. And it's not uniquely, North American, it's not uniquely Western. And similarly, there is no cape in that. There is a lot of kind of savior complex within the philanthropic sector. And that's not what people need. They don't need somebody to come and save them. They don't need a superhero. And oftentimes it's dignity, it's access to resources, it's breaking down silos, it's opening doors. And so a lot of times what I'm talking about now in my philanthropic advising practice is to help people who have more resources than they need really understand the doors that they can open. And sometimes the doors that they can open are with dollars, but sometimes it's with access to decision makers. Sometimes it's by giving a testimonial to somebody to say, I vouch for this person in this space, and I believe what they're saying to be really valuable. And so that ability to add on to the layer of giving dollar amounts, it's also to give your leverage, it's to give your persuasion and to open doors. That, I think, is where the real magic happens with philanthropy today. All of the dollars in the world could be deployed, and we might still find ourselves exactly where we are now if it isn't matched with really understanding kind of the doors that could be opened, the access to decision-making power, the access to set the strategy. Those are the kinds of tools that we need to play up at this moment in time, because it's kind of all hands on deck where we find ourselves in the world today.
Yeah. I know with the work that you and I have done together, the thing that I've learned and come to admire so greatly about you is the work you do to help communities that have been either marginalized or forgotten or overlooked in some way. And I think, as you look out into the world today and with the work that you're doing, as a philanthropist, and for so many people who are listening, because what you just said is so important. Look, we're not just always talking about money, because yes, money is important, of course, and we live in a world where it does actually open a lot of doors. But in reality, it is not just money that opens doors. Influence opens doors, access opens doors. And so when we think about that broader sense of philanthropy, and for any of our guests who are listening right now, what advice would you give them in terms of using that influence and resources and access that they have? Where should they be focusing? Because traditionally when we think about philanthropy, it has gone into things like, I'm going to support the school that I went to, or I'm going to support, the community-led organization that helps the insert cause here. But are there more non-traditional places that people should be thinking about, that perhaps just aren't entering their field of vision right now?
For sure. I think it's the same kind of call to action from before. So listen humbly. So where are you not connected? Where are you seeing challenges or places that are underfunded? Within a Canadian context, Indigenous communities are grossly underfunded. Black communities are grossly underfunded. LGBTQ communities are also underfunded. So there's many reports, many calls to action, many ways that you can kind of listen to what's already in the ecosystem of folks who have been underfunded, and see how can you engage with those communities, listen to what they might be calling for, and can you be a bridge? Can you be a connection where there was disconnection, and do that in a way that is transformational and not transactional. So transactional would look like, I read this newspaper article and I have all of the answers for you and coming with all of your answers, as opposed to kind of picking up the phone and saying, hey, I read this newspaper article. I really don't know what I don't know. Do you have time for a conversation? Do you have more that I could read? Can I get educated on this? And extending a hand for a little bit of a deeper rapport and relationship building, and then see where you go from there.
What I love about what you just said is that the example you gave, pick up the phone, call, I've read this newspaper article and I don't know anything. How can you help me learn more? As opposed to, hi, I've read this newspaper article. I don't know how I can help you. Tell me how I can help you. And I think the difference there was the invitation was for that individual to learn more first and to allow the ask or offer for help to come once that knowledge is there, versus assuming that community needs help. Yeah. And I know, that is such an important thing, because often we go in assuming that we know how to help, or assuming that we can help in some way. Somebody should just tell us. And in both of those scenarios, not only is the assumption taking us down a road that's not helpful, but more importantly, we're actually putting stress on that community, because in the way in which they operate, help may look very different than what we can provide.
And so that's it.
Yeah. And I think that's powerful. Rebecca, the work you do in this world is so incredibly important. And I want to say, first of all, thank you for helping so many of us to start to see the world differently, and for the communities that you're a part of and those that you are building. You are creating impact, and our world will be better because of it. Now, our guests who have been watching, many I'm sure would like to learn more. How can they stay in touch with you?
The best way to stay in touch with me is to reach out on my website, RebeccaDarwent.com, and there are links to my social media. I'm active on Instagram as well as LinkedIn, so you can follow me there to kind of stay in touch on the community-led initiatives that I'm sharing out, the collaborative philanthropy that I'm sharing out, as well as becoming part of the communities that I'm building, as you said.
And is there any last words you'd like to share with our guests today?
I just really encourage people to take that moment to pause and to encourage you to listen humbly, even if it's in one small space over this weekend. How can you listen with humility to your family members or your friends? We are all connected, we are all interconnected, and the time is now. Let's start together.
Well, thank you again so much for being here. And thank you to all of our guests who joined us live or listening on replay. We so appreciate you. This has been Conversations with Thought Leaders. I'm Andrea Sampson. I'll be back here in 2 weeks with another interesting conversation with an incredible thought leader. We'll see you then.